Committee. So all things related to the justice system after someone has been found guilty of a crime end up coming under my committee. So the conditions of incarceration, of course, the programming, the reentry programs that we have, and ways that we are changing the system so that we make sure that people are ready to leave with new skills and new commitment and new empowerment.
Yeah. And those sectors are so important to the Black community, given that we've been impacted so much by this criminal justice system historically, right? Our neighborhoods have been targeted. Our children, our people have been, you know, massively incarcerated, right? And so really having reform and justice in these sectors when it comes to criminal justice are so important to our community. I think that's
very important. Yes. I want to talk tonight a little bit about voting rights, since we are right in the middle of an election. It's an important year.
Yes.
You've done a lot of work around restoration of voting rights for people with felony convictions. Talk a little bit about your work there. And I'm interested in the haters and what they had to say in opposition to your work. Well, haters are gonna hate.
right.
So,
We know that.
but what were their issues when they were in opposition? Because it's taken you 9 years. How many years did it take you to actually get the legislation through?
It was actually my first bill I put in 20 years ago, put out for consideration. It took me 9 years to get it passed and to the governor.
9 years.
9 years. And, you know, sometimes you just have to be persistent, because within, you know, that persistence, you actually become more hopeful that eventually you'll wear down that resistance or find the pathway to remove the resistance altogether. And so the bill that was passed way back in 2009 is now up for some, we're looking at it again to see if we can make it even more fair for people who are coming out of the system. So currently, if a person does have a felony conviction on their record and they are no longer under the supervision of the Department of Corrections here in Washington State, then they are eligible to register to vote, which they can do online between now and Monday the 26th, or go into the elections office in Pierce County and register to vote right up through election day. So there's still time. And
yes, absolutely. And that's just exciting information too. You know, it's liberating.
It's really important to share this information over and over again, that people do have their voting rights restored. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people who don't believe that. They are, you know, full of old scripts about, you know, they're never going to be able to vote again. And so I've watched a lot of people sort of recapture that ability to vote. And did I just freeze up?
Oh, we could still hear you.
We can hear you.
Sorry.
Hey, you're still hot in our neighborhood, so you might have been frozen over there.
What we're looking at now in the legislature is expanding that to if you're no longer inside, if you're no longer in a prison.
So if you're on parole,
we still have to vote, and we still have to work on that. And the opposition really comes around those issues of truth in sentencing, and people need to pay for their offenses against the public. And it, you know, it's placing people who have a felony conviction in a whole class by themselves, that they'll never be worthy, you know, of repatriation into the community. And civic duty, fulfilling your civic duty and actually having a voice, goes back to the founding of this country. You know, no taxation without representation. You know, are people with felony convictions represented? You bet. People like me are elected every, you know, in my case, every 4 years, but we always have elections going on, and people should always, if they've crossed those hurdles, they should always recognize that they have the right to vote.
And we see it sort of as a form of voter suppression. If a person has served their sentence, they are now out on probation,
Mm-hmm.
Why do they continue to need to suffer those the loss of their civil rights, the loss of their right to vote? They deal with enough barriers to housing, to employment, their whole careers that are foreclosed for them because of those criminal backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
When I was working at Metro Parks, I saw quite often individuals who were on work release trying to get opportunities, and because they weren't coming in contact with vulnerable people, you know, there were things they could do like landscaping and so forth that gave them an opportunity to get a hand up. So why continue to punish a person long after they've already served their time? And right now, even after they're off probation, we're still saying we need to punish them. We see it as a form of suppressing the vote. And because there's a disproportionate impact on Black and Brown communities, it's suppressing the vote of Black and Brown people.
Exactly.
That's right. You know, and we don't often realize that while we're electing a new president, knock on wood, in a few weeks, that we have a 50 state strategy. Every state can be different from one another. You know, our voting rights are established at the state level. And so, Carol, you'll see those kind of voter suppression tactics all over the news right now, where communities had ballot boxes and now they've taken all the ballot boxes off. That is voter suppression. They are having people force them to come in person in the middle of a pandemic. That is voter suppression. They're making people bring identification cards when there are, in fact, particularly Native American people who were born in this country where they did not have birth certificates on reservations. So how do they prove that they are a citizen of the United States? Good Lord, you know, a Native American having to prove that they're a citizen of this country, that is voter suppression. So you're absolutely right. It is meant to suppress the votes of older people. It's meant to suppress the votes of young families.
Absolutely.
You know, it's meant to suppress the votes of the disabled and people who are needful of having a bus ride to get to a polling place, but particularly around the issue of the justice system and that space between being in the justice system and being a voter. You're definitely seeing activities across this country that are trying to suppress the Black vote and the brown vote.
Well, one of the things that we were reading about earlier today is that the Supreme Court ruled against curbside voting, apparently in Alabama, you know, the thriving metropolis of Alabama. A particular federal court had ruled against it, and then it went up to the Supreme Court, and apparently they threw it out. Now, in a pandemic.
So, another thing that the Supreme Court just did was it said, you know, like our state, we have a postmark by election day, right? So you're mailing in your ballot. It has to be postmarked by November 3rd, no question. So you can't just go and throw it into a post office box at 5 o'clock in the afternoon on November 3rd. You have to make sure somebody is opening up that post office box, you know, that ballot box or that regular mailbox, and they're putting a stamp on there. So you really need, you know, you need to vote early just to make sure that your ballot makes it through that process. If you're going to take it to the post office, if you're going to put it out and flip your little flag up on your mailbox, you need to make sure that that's several days before the election day. But in some states like ours, if it's postmarked, we'll count it. And we don't actually certify elections until 20 days after the election to make.
That's because we actually want people to participate in the electoral process.
We want people to vote.
Absolutely.
But there was another state that had a 3-day lag time before they certify their election, went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court kicked it out.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of the federal courts are moving in a direction that feels like suppression, The Supreme Court seems to be moving in a direction that feels like voter suppression. And I had a family member living in Georgia who said, it's a predominantly or largely African-American state. Why can't we get an African-American senator out of here? And they think voter suppression is part of the reason why they can't.
Absolutely.
Even though they're a large percentage of the population in Georgia, they can't seem to get people who look like them elected. There's a problem with that.
Huge problem. And, you know, in addition to the felony community, right, which is disproportionately Black and brown people, young people are also disenfranchised from voting. Just because with mail-in ballots, well, you got to have a regular address. We know young people move the most frequently when they're moving from their parents' house to their dormitories, back to their parents' house. Maybe now they're living with 3 roommates, you know, and maybe they're subletting an apartment. You know, young people are moving all the time. And that's another way that we're disenfranchised. And it's so important, especially, I mean, yes, it's a key election, it's a presidential election, but we know, as we mentioned in the last episode, that voting locally is almost more important than just these national votes, right? And so really engaging, I mean, it's great that we're loosening up these restrictions when it comes to voting, right? Everyone should really have the right to vote, even people who are serving time in prison, because in my opinion, you know, human rights don't stop on the gates of the prison. We still need to hear what's going on in there. You know, we know that it's not livable conditions, right? We know they're not being treated well, and they're disproportionately Black and brown, right? But, you know, we'll get there, baby steps.
Well, here's another point, is that over 50% of the people that are in the Pierce County Jail tonight are awaiting trial. In other words, they've not been found guilty of anything.
See?
Their vote is still allowable. Now, that may mean that somebody needs to hand carry the ballot over to the Pierce County Jail and have that person be able to fill it out. But they don't lose their right to vote just
until
because
they're
they're
convicted.
awaiting trial. So they may not have enough money to post bail, or, you know, but if they have not been found guilty and they aren't going to be guilty, maybe they're not even guilty of a felony. You know, voting rights are never taken away if you haven't been convicted of a felony. So,
and let's not even talk about
either.
Let's not talk about the ones who never have any charges filed. There are a number of folks who sit in the Pierce County Jail and they're called NCF'd. They never have a charge filed. They're just sitting there because they can't
They never lose their right to vote then. So
whose responsibility is it to make sure they get the chance to exercise that right to vote? Is it something that
families,
sheriff needs to do, families need to do? Do they need to send a kite up to Dan Meyer's office?
Cell Block 12.
How do we make sure they get to vote?
They can receive mail at the jail. So they could have a family member mail it into them, or the Pierce County Elections Office could mail it to them there. And so I know that our election officer, Julie Anderson, has always been positively intentioned about making sure that people have the right to vote and that ballot gets to them. So it could mean that somebody could call and make a call on behalf of that person and get that ballot sent to them right there in the jail.
Now, what else are you proud of with respect to justice and the work that you're doing there? I know that piece of voting legislation was really a hallmark of your career. What else? What's your number 2 that you're proud of?
Well, I work a lot on juvenile justice issues too, because I don't look at the correction system as something that just stands alone. You know, it doesn't. It's part of a long continuum. So whether we're looking at suspensions and expulsions in schools, and we're looking at racial disproportionality there, or we're looking at kids being truant from school and having a petition filed against them and spending time incarcerated because they are truant from school, those are disproportionately Black and brown kids. So or kids that make it into the juvenile justice system, again, disproportionate levels. So I work on all of that points along that continuum, because there are so many places where a dollar spent on prevention and intervention and services can save hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. When you see people with the life expectancy of less than 60 years old, you know, if you're in the prison system. And so, you know, it's just the humane thing to do to keep people out of that prison system, because it is dehumanizing, because it is traumatizing. It is literally a case of toxic stress that people endure.
Who are you telling? We are living this experience. Mean, I've seen, I've just seen from my own, you know, upbringing in public schools, right, how we are targeted. I mean, the school to prison pipeline is a very real thing, right? There's the stats, the data to prove, you know, that, you know, Black boys, Black girls are disproportionately expelled. And that does start this, you know, it holds a pattern, right? Because you create a record with the schools, and the records transfer from school to school, you know, even state to state. I had a relative, you know, a cousin went to school out here in Seattle, Washington, right? But then transferred to Louisiana, and his record was carried with him. You know, and then now they're going to perceive you to be a troublesome kid. They're not going to put a lot of, you know, effort and energy into you, right? Instead, straight punitive. Okay. Well, then the kids are going to shut down, right? The kids aren't going to go to school. They're not receiving the support or the education they deserve, right?
And diversion's a big piece of the puzzle. I know you've done a lot of work around, and what we mean by diversion, it can happen at any point. We use a model called sequential intercept model at the county. At any point in the justice system, you can divert a child out. And the earlier, the better, right? And then work with the family. You did some work in that space.
You know, what's been so interesting about the COVID pandemic is some of its effect on the justice system, because where Washington had the highest numbers in the country for the incarceration of children for issues like truancy and being incorrigible and breaking curfews and drinking or smoking under the age of 18 or 21. You know, so all these things have conspired to Washington having the highest number of youth in jail for those kinds of reasons.
Nonviolent reasons.
But COVID hits, and all of a sudden the courts go, all this kid did was, you know, be truant from school. We need to empty out. We need to social distance within our facilities, and we don't want a kid like that in there. Well, no, that's what we've been saying. We don't need a kid like that in there. They don't need to meet their new best friend that's actually committed a crime. You know, we want them to be in a diversion program so that they can we can look at what's facing the family and try to help the family solve whatever problems that they may reveal that they have. You know, and
you also dealt with the list of crimes that would cause an auto decline by the juvenile justice system. Do you want to explain that real quickly, and how in the last couple of years you changed those rules a lot?
We actually have had laws change during the 1990s that were those tough on crime years, where they talked about social predators and super predators and you know, all kinds of stuff. And really the science now the science now fortunately is being used to help us make better decisions now. But we're still going to have those lingering effects of these really tough situations. So we had laws that basically gave the prosecutors a lot of leeway to take a 16 or 17-year-old and push them immediately into the adult system. And what we did in the legislature was peel that back, you know, to just the very, very serious crimes, and not have the prosecutors across the state, you know, push push those kids in, because once they go into the adult system, you know, it's really difficult to provide.
Hard to get them out.
Almost impossible.
So now we also passed a law that says if you commit a crime as a juvenile, so under 18 years of age, that you will stay in the juvenile justice system until the age of 25. And so that means that it gives us 6 more years.
That's good.
Or 4 more years in some situations, where we keep someone in the programming center of the juvenile justice system, as opposed to, you know, sending them up, you know, to the adult system. And we've just seen such horrible things happen with folks that are so young and vulnerable being put into that system. And so we have now used the science to say brain development matters. And we need to continue to have that child who does not have a fully developed brain until about the age of 25 or 26. We want to keep them in a milieu where they are going to receive the kind of services they need so that their brain can grow and thrive and not be affected by that toxic stress in the adult system.
Now, the flip side is that you know, some people say, well, should the 25-year-old be in the same room with the 12-year-old, right? Or the 16-year-old?
Probably not. So
but they do segregate them, right?
Yeah. We don't have any 12-year-olds in that deep end of the pool, thankfully.
Yes.
But I've been trying to get that. We don't actually have a floor. In the past, we have had 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds. I think you'll recall a couple cases from Pierce County where we had 13-year-olds that were put in adult prison. You know, the fact that they can come out as adults, you know, there have been huge court cases involving the Pierce County prosecution of young Black boys in our community. And I will tell you, it's those cases have changed my life. They've changed my work in the legislature, because there is no defense. There's no defense for treating children that are in the foster care system as if they have the same intention as 25-year-old men who are committing a crime. They don't, and they don't have the brain capacity to understand that. It is science.
Right.
It's science. And so, you know, we are making a lot of changes. I will have a bill coming forward to extend that age of jurisdiction. Instead of letting 16-year-olds go into the adult system, actually keep kids longer, like till 21, to even have the courts consider them to be adults at all for committing crimes. So there will be a lot of resistance for that.
Yeah, you can't legally buy liquor, but you can go to prison.
Yeah, that logic just doesn't add up. Yeah, it just doesn't add up.
Yes, you can go to war, you can go to prison, but you can't buy a bottle of liquor of Jack Daniels.
Nope. Nope. Well, I'm glad to hear, although Washington State, we were the top prosecuting juvenile. That is such I'm really sad about that statistic, but so it's really good to hear that we're starting to peel back on those restrictions, and we do see some reform. I just want to reiterate to our viewers some of the key points that Senator Darneille mentioned here. So,
yeah,
one,
to wrap up.
We got a lot of content, so I definitely want to make sure we highlight these key points. First being that, of course, felons in Washington can vote. Woo-hoo. Okay. So Cousin Tommy, Uncle, whoever, Uncle Willie, yes. It doesn't matter. You can vote here in Washington State too. Even if you're awaiting trial, you still, that right has not been taken away from you. So I guess who are we connecting with, Senator? Is it family?
Get somebody to get your ballot to you.
Yeah.
That would be our elections office at the Pierce County Auditor.
And listen, family, if somehow you are able to get the envelope in there, don't put anything in there that is Don't put anything in the envelope except the ballot, okay?
We don't need this one tossed out, okay?
That's right.
This is an important envelope.
We need it to count.
Word to the wise.
Senator, thank you very much for being with us tonight and for your patience with the technology. You know, technology is a wonderful thing when it works exactly the way my mind thinks it should, which is not to say that that's always the exact way it actually works. So thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Well, I would love to come back anytime. When you've got a name like Institute for Black Justice, we got a lot to talk about. So thank you.
Why don't you sign off with just telling folks which district that you are running for Senate in?
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, we might want to mention the fact that you're on the ballot.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm on the ballot with Joe Biden.
You're not running against him, but you're on the ballot with him. Very good.
Yeah, but I'm running for state senate again, and I do represent the 27th district, which is about 2/3 of the city of Tacoma. And it's been my real honor to serve this district. And we have been a community that goes through a lot of change. And I think a lot of it's been for the better, and I'm happy to try to help make that happen in the legislature. And thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Good night. All righty, guys. That was good.
Yeah.
We got the tea from the source, from the teapot. We sure did. So,
I don't know what to think about all the technological glitches. Somebody said that Mercury is in retrograde tonight, whatever that means. But
we're Black people. We keep things rolling. Okay,
go forward either way, right?
That is so true. And before we sign off here, we want to remind you guys that we are featuring the Crystal Stiff stories on our Black Robe podcast, which means that we want to highlight your story. If, whether you've overcome a challenge within the justice system, are still struggling with some injustice, we want to know about it. So please go to our website at www.instituteforblackjustice.org and let us know about it. We would love to have you as a guest on our podcast.
Yeah, and if you click on that link, instituteforblackjustice@gmail.com, I am getting your emails. So you can get in touch with us and let us know if you need us. If you just want to talk through some things with us, we can help. We'll see if we can help. So thanks very much for being with us tonight. I'm Carol Mitchell.
Yes, and I'm Anzhane Slaughter, and that's the Black Robe.
Good night.
Good night. See you guys next week.